Today, I'd like to go outside of my DC comfort zone to sing the praises of an unsung fallen hero. While I may be a DC guy through and through, that's not to say that there aren't some Marvel characters that have always interested me. Spider-Man, the X-Men, Blade, Punisher, and that last name is the very character we'll be covering today. My personal favorite Punisher, Ray Stevenson. Now, before I go on, full disclosure here, I've never sat down to watch the Punisher or the Daredevil shows. I intend on doing that at some point here on the channel, but as of right now, it still hasn't happened. I've seen plenty of clips, I've seen a bunch of scenes, but I have never sat down to watch them in their own narrative. And while I can certainly appreciate that interpretation from afar, all due respect to the past, present, and future Punishers, in my opinion, Ray Stevenson was the perfect one. For me, he embodied the character in just about every way one could.
Stay out of my way.
Let me out.
You know, throwing you a tip now and again is one thing. Password to the crime database, etc., but letting you go?
So,
Fine.
he taught you how to shoot. A good agent keeps his family safe. This is where you do it.
In any war, there's collateral damage. You know that.
Collateral damage. I killed an agent in the field. One of the good guys.
Was Lisa's favorite toy. She got so angry when her little brother used to hide it from her.
Does she care if I play with it?
No. See you in I see you anywhere near. I'll kick your ass out.
Aesthetically, Stevenson's Punisher looked as if he just stepped out of a comic book. Point blank, Ray Stevenson looked like Frank Castle. He looked exactly like the Punisher, whereas previous Punishers looked more like Comic-Con cosplay at best and, well, bad Halloween costumes at worst. This Punisher looked like the Punisher. From the comic-accurate costume to the perfect panel-to-person actor to play the part, everything about this guy radiated Punisher. Ray Stevenson didn't just look like the Punisher, he felt like the Punisher. The stoic and stern manner in which he operated in his day-to-day life, the soulless nature in which he carries his missions out isn't evidence to the absence of a soul, but rather proof of having one crushed. The Punisher carried himself with a sense of imminent sadness and deep, inescapable despair brought on by the inability to turn back time. There's just so much pain that's present in this performance. You can tell the death of his family weighs on him at every waking moment of each and every day. He walks around as a ghost of his former self, haunted by the lives he couldn't save. There's a certain sorrow in his eyes that I don't think ever truly leaves his pupils throughout the runtime. Even when he's not out hurting others, you just know that he himself is hurting. While he may not have a broad spectrum of emotions, you can still tell what he thinks and feels at every given moment, without the actor ever having to enunciate or articulate it. The character doesn't verbalize the confines of his soul, but his actions and his reactions showcase it. Frank Castle lives only to carry out his vendetta, to avenge the family that he lost. If I could paraphrase a phrase from another major Marvel icon, he's great at what he does, but what he does ain't so great. He's strategic, he's tactical, he's resourceful. He's a threat to all those he comes across. No matter what the situation or the obstacle is, even if the numbers game is against him, those who encounter the Punisher are at an extreme disadvantage. And I think what I really love about this performance is that the Punisher is such a hyperbolic, over-the-top, excessive character that it's almost impossible to ground him in any sense of reality. He doesn't deal with a lot of powers or supers. He usually sticks to, regular people crime. But the character in nature is so over the top when it comes to brutality and violence that despite the grittiness of the character, it would be very easy for him to come off as comical or cartoony. This man lives and breathes death and destruction. And while that could work well for a character like Deadpool, where the violence is played for laughs and the character is played for a punchline, for a character like the Punisher, who is supposed to be deathly serious, I think it's much more challenging to depict that in a way that wouldn't solicit applause or laughter. Still, Ray Stevenson was up for that challenge, as he provides a Punisher that feels real. He lives up to the hype and lives the legacy, handling business in the only way he knows how. With the careless way in which he meets criminals, you may think that he lacks compassion, but that couldn't be any further from the truth. While he may never articulate or emote it very well, his actions speak a lot louder than the little words he does use. He cares a great deal for a good handful of people, and that small circle is constantly expanding. Learning to like Carlos despite his criminal past, figuring out how to coexist with certain cops in the case of Agent Budiansky and Soap. This movie doesn't really give us the origin of a lot of these relationships, they just let them play out and explain themselves. We aren't expectedly shown how he met Microchip, but instead this movie drops us into a world with previously established lore and lets us make our own conclusions. The nature of these relationships is on full display. There almost seems to be a little bit of reluctance on the part of Castle in working with any of these individuals. Not because he doesn't like them necessarily, but because he doesn't want any harm to come to them. The people he loves have already become casualties of a war that they weren't involved in. So this Castle isn't looking to allow history to repeat itself. As a precaution, he keeps all those around him at arm's length, sharing very little information and very little words in general. Despite the limited interaction, Frank still grows fond of the little company that he keeps, and he visibly breaks when they meet their fates. I think that's actually the best way to describe the humanity of the character. It breaks through his persona. The Punisher aims to look emotionless, and he probably would prefer if he was, but he's not nearly as apathetic as he appears, because at the end of the day, he's just a man. There's a lot to be said of this depiction of the anti-hero. The character continues to develop all throughout the movie. He learns that his shoot first, never bother asking questions ever routine comes with casualties of their own, as he accidentally takes the life of an undercover Fed, one who ironically supported the Punisher and his stance against organized crime. I will say I think that's a little bit out of character for the Punisher of the comics, because that guy is not fond of cops, despite once being one. But it works well for the story, and I think that it's not completely out of the Punisher's range of caring. Despite him being the movie's primary protagonist, it's not at all confused about his morality. While he worked toward a good cause, he did do bad things trying to meet that end goal. It doesn't paint him as a black and white misunderstood hero, but instead lights him in shades of gray, allowing the audience to judge his actions for themselves, not exactly telling them what they should feel or what they should think about him. What I love about this movie and this performance is that it doesn't conflate the Punisher as a cool action guy. No offense to Dolph Lundgren or Thomas Jane, I definitely appreciate each of their depictions in their own ways, but both iterations seem to harp much more on violence being awesome, showcasing a generic action movie hero too cool to look back at explosions. Like, these guys were straight out of the Expendables. One of them literally. But with Ray Stevenson, we saw much more of the tragedy of the vigilante. He isn't some shallow self-insert fantasy. There's an in-depth darkness that comes with being the Punisher. In spite of that, the Punisher is still a man who wears his heart, and furthermore his heartache, on his sleeve. While this Punisher is the movie's protagonist, he's not your traditional hero. He's very selective with his empathy, and his heroicism at times is more centered around revenge than it is justice. He meets criminals in an absolutely careless manner, showing those he comes across no mercy, taking no names as he builds a body count. He's a man of very few words, only speaking when absolutely necessary, and not offering all that much up in terms of conversation. Ray Stevenson actually doesn't speak a word for nearly the first half hour into the movie. He's stoic and silent, stern and self-isolated, tired and tortured. Stevenson humanizes Castle, but doesn't legitimize his intention or justify his actions, playing the character monotone and flat in moments shared with others, but then displaying a more three-dimensional side in private. I truly think this version of the character is extremely underrated. In my eyes, this is one of the greatest big-screen translations of a comic book accurate character. Or, at the very least, one of the most accurate adaptations ever put to film. For whatever reason, it feels like Ray was written off as being bad or bland because the movie wasn't beloved. But I think that's way off base, which is probably why Ray was actually asked to return to the role. Yet one of the lesser known facts is that Ray Stevenson would play the character on one more occasion in the Superhero Squad show, where he played an equally dark but much more sanitized version of the character, spooking the rest of the cast of this decidedly PG show. It's a great reference and a great return.
A sickness that sneaks in through the cracks. The way that Brussels sprouts sneak onto a plate of delicious macaroni and cheese. I'm out here to keep those stinking sprouts off the mac and cheese.
Ultimately, what I think is most upsetting is that our time with this actor in this part was so limited. And it's even more upsetting that our time with this actor was so limited. Regardless, I will cherish whatever time we got of him in the role, even if I wish we had a little bit more. With that being said, if you like this video and would like to see me make a video on other Punishers put to film, let me know in the comment section below by leaving a comment saying,
That's no way to punish the Punisher.
I am vengeance. I am the night, and that was Infuso. Just remember, if you're not tuning in, then you're missing out.
So, if you like the words that came out of his mouth hole, and you too would like to become a V-generate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, nerds!
And if you're not joining the fun, you're in for one bad day. And you know what they say about having one bad day?
Catch him next time. Same bat time. Same bat channel.
Now, before I go, I don't usually do this. I've had a Patreon for a while now, but I've really struggled with what to do with it. Luckily, the time is upon us where I can actually offer you guys exclusive and extended content that I can't make here on the channel. With new restrictions on what kind of content can be monetized or hell, even shown here on the platform, now's as good a time as ever to be placing my completely unaltered, uncensored, extended videos on my Patreon. I don't want to put my videos behind a paywall, but that's kind of the best place to put them for the time being. So if there was ever a time to give a stranger money on the internet, well, I would like to think that now is that time. Just so everyone knows, all the money I make off my Patreon goes directly back into the channel. Everyone who donates to the Patreon will not be seen as a fan, but rather a producer of said content. And you will be credited as such in the closing credits here on the channel. So if you have the time and $1 to spare, help a guy out. If you can't, I appreciate your time and attention nonetheless.